across them so that you don't have 5 brands all ganged up on the occasion called, empty nesters sitting together at night. How do you think about occasions as a innovation growth path, as you mentioned? I think there are probably, and again, I have the disadvantage of not knowing your categories well enough to be able to say, here's the 5 ways it's different. But, the vectors of innovation and growth, occasion, form, packaging, channel, I think that they, again, back to something like a Kingsford, there's probably only so many ways and places, you would buy it and ways and places you'd use it. So I think, do you do a single serve? Do you do a multi-pack? Do you do a bulk pack? Do you do a, handy, great for consuming in the car with no muss, no fuss pack? But just the whole issues of how you consume it, where you consume it, what's involved with consuming it, who you're consuming it with, all those things, then lead to variables in terms of innovation and product design and package design and channel choice that may be more sort of multifaceted. And another, again, might be the whole issue of just the emotion that's associated with food. And obviously, every product has, most every product has at least some degree of emotion connected to it. And, but I think there's just something about food, it's a comfort food, you're a provider to your family, it's sustenance, it's guilt, it's reward, there's massive consumer emotion tied up in the stuff we eat, good and bad. So I think being conscious of that, leveraging it, being really choiceful about it, is certainly something that's true in food marketing.
Yeah.
So I'll pause there and see if any of that's going in a useful direction.
Yeah, no, definitely it is. And a lot of this, is not about necessarily trying to, in this moment, compare versus our Clorox categories. Yeah. We're just trying to gain that perspective so that we can later see how it fits.
Yeah, you can be the judge, sure.
Another area I'd love to understand as we're talking still more about this understanding of a definition of a food company. In your experience, how was success measured and how was failure defined? And do you feel as though success, failure, were there differences in how you thought of them within the context of a food company versus a different provider?
Yeah. Well, I went from financial services back to food. And in terms of just what defines success and what gets people stressed out, I can't say I saw much difference there. When sales are good and you're hitting targets, life is good. But, when, sales are down, I would say in food, and again, this is relative to financial services, not to other CPG, share was a little bit less of a concern. Even back to my General Mills days, eons ago, share was a constant focus, whereas in other categories, market share was certainly not something we didn't pay attention to, but it wasn't quite as huge a driver. There were, let's see, I want to talk about financial. So let's see, what else? Other than that, I think sales, ad effectiveness, brand equities, awareness, consideration, all those things were common across the various categories that I've worked in. So I can't say I can think of any specific metrics. I mean, obviously things like, distribution not relevant for non-CPG categories. But I can't think of any others that were specifically different because it was food.
Got it. Final one here for the definition of food company. And this is something we have been struggling a little bit as we've had our own internal conversations. And this is whether, is there a difference between being a larger food company versus a smaller food company? And we'd love to get your perspective on how, does it influence some of these other unique characteristics, success, failure, or is it more of a small company versus large company dynamic and not really, influenced by being a food company?
Yeah, I suspect, I've not worked at a small food company, but I've been involved in the integration of small food companies that we acquired. And I think I agree with you that it's relatively more about small versus big as opposed to small food versus big food. Small brings it with the agility, the speed, clarity and unity of culture that is sometimes very, intrinsically wound up in the brand and the general proposition. So I'm not sure. I'm just trying to rack my brain. I suppose the difference that might be more relevant for food is just when you're a small food company versus a small, ball bearings or bleach or widget company, there can be meaningful differences in terms of just the end product. Coming out of a massively optimized factory and supply chain and distribution system versus something that's, a little bit more on a craft scale, whether it's more loving attention or whether it's different ingredients or whether it's, the processes, are less sort of industrial strength. But, there are a number of times where the difference between what the research labs produced at a small kind of pilot plant was night and day from what rolled off the production line at the mega factory. So I think there can be just some meaningful differences in the experience of the end product between small food and big food.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can certainly see that and realize you hadn't worked specifically at a small foods company, but I think having that experience of integrating them is so that is very interesting to think about and reinforces some of what we've already been talking about internally.
The other thing I'd say about, and again, it's a little bit more about big versus small, but small food companies may well have evolved a marketing model that is very well tuned to that product in its category and its consumer. And the big food company has its marketing model that's relatively more the big company's marketing model as opposed to bespoke for each and every brand in its stage of life. And, just as an example, Hershey acquired Crave beef jerky, this sort of culinary, upscale, Sonoma beef jerky company. And one of the first things it did was say, great, we'll put our marketing and sales muscle behind it, and suddenly Crave beef jerky is on the shelves at Walmart, which was possibly the worst thing to do for an upscale, culinary, hip food brand, right? You're at Walmart. So I think that was just an example of the Crave folks prior to Hershey had much more grassroots, experiential, sampling at marathons and food and wine festivals, very, very different from a Walmart vibe. So, small may have its own more appropriate marketing model than big would.